Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Play Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the Super Game Boy, or the Game Boy, whatever you may prefer. And speaking of that, I figured I'd point out why I'm playing this on the Super Game Boy as opposed to the Game Boy player or hell, even an emulator. Um, I kind of like the color palette this game provides under the Super Game Boy as opposed to, the other versions. So, like for example, I don't really like how this game looks on the Game Boy Color because even though Samus is orange, yellow, and red as you would expect her to be, I don't like the way the environment looks. It's all blue and black and dull, and it's like, ugh. It's not the kind of color palette I'd expect to have for SR388, you know? And with the environment being kind of like closely tied in to blending in with Samus and her environments pretty well. I don't know. It's like with the way the green background is, as well as like primary colors being shifted to yellow, as opposed to like really dull um, colors that don't really fit it all too well otherwise. It kind of gives off an atmospheric vibe I wouldn't feel otherwise, and I guess you could say it's me putting on my nostalgia goggles for this playthrough. I'll leave that up to your interpretation. But anywho, with the upgrades obtained within SR388's Phase 2, we're heading into the depths of Phase 2 to exterminate the rest of the Metroids left within this particular region before moving on to other areas. And that's just kind of how a lot of areas are divided. I kind of like that feel, really, because they know to kind of put the upgrades apart from the Metroids, and then they kind of give, like, the Metroids their own, like, little general vicinity of, uh, location, you know? Like, say, for example, you have this one open-ended area where you have to go find the upgrades before you can really, um, make further progress, or, the upgrades, for the most part, just kind of make your quest a bit easier, because much like Metroid 1, where you only really needed upgrades like the Ice Beam, or the High Jump Boots, or the Morph Ball Bombs, or the Morph Ball to really make progress, Metroid 2 kind of follows that philosophy as well, where a lot of upgrades you get in this game are simply for the sake of convenience and not much else. But of course, I'm going to be getting these upgrades because, as I had mentioned earlier, this will be a 100% playthrough, unlike Metroid 2. I'm giving this game my love and labor, as I'd expect all of you to come into this playthrough expecting. But yeah, apart from areas that have upgrades, you also have, like, say an off-beaten path that goes into the region where the Metroids are. And I think that's a very, really, really clever way to, like, disposition the Metroids from the rest of the phase, really. Because if they had Metroids put out in a way to where they were just an off-beaten paths, closely intermingled with, like, the upgrades, or not put off in separate branched paths, I think it would make, Metroid collection and just hunting a hell of a lot more confusing than it should be. That being said, though, I don't know if they're going to apply this general idea to the remake or not, the one that Nintendo's doing, not AM2R. Um, because from what I've seen of that game footage as of right now, being a month ahead of its release, the game almost looks nothing like its original, like, counterpart, which is kind of weird because even though Metroid Zero Mission felt more like a reimagining than a straight up remake, like, say for example, you had areas like Trizodia and Criteria that weren't in the original, and hell, you even saw Samus's gunship. That was kind of new. Um, a lot of areas like Brindley, Turan, Kraid, Brentstar, the way their general layout worked, even though, like, some of the room progression feels a little bit different, and, like, the room layouts were pretty different as a whole to kind of keep it from looking like the copy paste feel of the original. it still had like the same kind of like interconnected paths and general map layout of the original, Like Brinstar, for example, is still filled with vertical hallways with the occasional one or two, three or so branching paths that go to where the expansions or upgrades are. But from what I'm seeing of Samus Returns, it just looks like a completely new ordeal where the layout looks almost nothing like the original at all. And whether that's a bad thing or not, I don't really think I can answer that question honestly. I don't mind either way. I can't really say I have a problem with Metroid 2's layout aside from like a few offshoot examples, which I'm going to be getting into a bit later on. But I've never had a problem traversing through SR388. I like how even though the game is a bit more streamlined than the original, it still has like plenty of opportunities to go out of your way and find new paths within the areas you're going into. But you can't access other areas before exterminating the Metroids within. It's almost like you have non-linear areas within a linear structured game. You know what I'm saying? Like you have this central hub of tunnels that lead to like the other areas, and it's where the acid's that drops as you progress through the game. But like the moment you get into these new areas off the path, it's like they're kind of like their whole open ordeals, You can kind of do whatever you want within these constricted areas in any order you want. And to be honest, I kind of don't mind that. It's what I feel is like one of the most optimum levels of non-linearity you can get within like a Metroid game without alienating or confusing the players too much. And that's not to say you can't get confused in this game, because you certainly will at certain points. I know I did the first time I played this game, but like it is definitely a huge step up from Metroid 1, where the game had so many hallways that looked all too similar, or like too many dead ends that didn't look really obvious as to where you needed to go unless you did some really cryptic bombing around, without so much of a hint or like indication of where you can bomb or where not you can bomb, because there's plenty of locations in Metroid 1 where it looked like you can bomb but you couldn't, and it's like, ugh, stop being so inconsistent, game. Damn it. That being said though, there's still quite a trace of copy paste in this game. It is the very last game I feel like that kind of does that. Not counting Prime Hunters, but Prime Hunters does that in such an embarrassingly guilty way, it's not even funny. There's still rooms like this that look the same, but at the very least, they kind of repurpose these rooms for something else entirely. Like, instead of, like, this one room in Phase 2 where you had these enemies pop out of here, this simply served as a transition into Phase 3 with a Metroid surprise within it. Again, like the copy paste can get kind of annoying here and there, and the game's overall, I don't want to say bland, but similar looking architecture can definitely confuse some. But to me, it doesn't feel as bad as Metroid 1. And what I mean by that is that in Metroid 1, you had levels that definitely differentiated in theme. You had Brentstar, the Rocky Zone. You had Norfair, the Fiery Zone. You had Ridley and Carade's hideout. In this game, however, it's kind of a bit lacking in the general thematics, which I guess can either be off-putting or confusing to some, because for the majority of this game, it's either like infested with Metroid webbing hallways. You have your cavern areas, or you have your typical Chozo ruins. Feels like the Chozo have been over just about every planet in this system, it feels like. There's a particular reason why the Chozo were here, but we kind of don't find that out until Fusion. and I'll go into like the whole espionage behind that, I suppose. But yeah, in some ways, Metroid 2 can feel like a blander game because of the thematics not being as spread out. But I don't know, there's something about it that I feel like it kind of nails the feeling of isolation better than its predecessor. And what I mean by this is that the music, as you can no doubt tell, is kind of lacking, for a lack of a better term. Um, you have your good tracks like The Surface as FSR 388, which I still listen to on days end. But then you have places like this where it's all noise and chirps and crickets and shit. But I don't know, with how dark this game looks, you can definitely tell you're within a dark looking cavern, whereas with games like Metroid 1, it felt like the dark caverns only felt like they were there because of like system limitations. So, yeah, what I'm trying to say here is even though this is clearly an 8-bit game, Metroid 2 has a feeling of atmosphere that kind of surpasses even like some of the other Metroid games, hell, even its predecessor. And whether or not that's subjective to you or not, I don't really know or care, but I definitely get the feeling of isolation in this game better than I do in the original. And it certainly helps that I have the Game Boy player to thank for the palette I gave this game as well. And to back up my claims on this argument, when you get into later areas where, like where the Mega Metroids are, for example, the music just gets really tense, and you can tell the areas look a bit more dim and dark because you can see all of this webbing and just the feeling of like the music giving off this really tense, suspenseful vibe apart from like the rest of the game, you know? I think the music, even though it's not one of the better soundtracks, even though it's not like again one of the best soundtracks in the series, and I can see why some people don't like it, I think Metroid 2 really began that trend of really nailing the atmosphere. I think Metroid 2 was when the series began to like really envelop the meaning of what atmosphere is, because Metroid 1 already kind of brought in the experimental phase. Let's try it out a bit more, and Metroid 2 certainly surpasses it, at least in my opinion. If you don't think it is, if you don't feel that way like I do, feel free to explain in the comments why. I'm totally open to debate and discussion because I absolutely love these games with a dying passion. And what I might think of this game can completely contradict what another person may feel about this particular game, you know? But anyhow, earlier we just got the Vario suit. In the original Metroid, the Vario suit was simply just a pink color palette swap of the default suit you had normally. But in this game, the Vario suit is the introduction of Samus's shoulder pads. So again, another thing to be thankful for, I guess. Because of the Game Boy's limited color palette, the creators decided to give the Vario suit a more distinct look and feel, um, as opposed to just a simple color change as it was in the original. And that's kind of funny to think about too. Can you imagine how the other games would feel like if it stuck with the pink color swap? It'd be kind of weird looking back at that. So I guess in a way, we have more than one way, shape, and form to thank Metroid 2 for bringing about all of these changes to the formula. So what I'm getting here is one of the more obscure expansions in the game. I certainly didn't find this in my first playthrough, I can tell you that much. And this is actually one of the expansions that the Nintendo Power Up magazine missed. Um, I kind of talked about this briefly in the Metroid 1 playthrough, but I'll talk about it again in case you guys didn't watch that playthrough. Um, because it was done through the Nintendo Power without any guidance from Nintendo, and hell, not even having the internet on board as a whole. Uh, the issue of Nintendo Power I looked out for, maps and strategy of this game in particular, they didn't have all of the expansions, and that was like one of the 3 or 4 expansions they actually missed. So every time I would finish the game, I would have like 210 missiles, but then I'd go and watch Let's Plays of this. I'm saying, what the heck? Where'd they get 250? Did I put in a cheat code? And then I realized, watching other Let's Plays of this game, I realized, oh shoot, they actually forgot some of the expansions. So it wasn't until like maybe almost 8 years after I played this game that I realized, well, fuck, I better go and find these expansions then before I make a complete mockery out of myself. And yeah, I wouldn't worry about, that expansion being in a offbeat path too much of a flaw because, again, that's only like one of 4 missile expansions. Most of the other missile expansions you find in this whole ordeal are put in like offbeat paths in very open situations where you have like 2 or 3 out at once. So it never becomes a struggle finding more missiles in this game. And yeah, that was yet another Metroid we had to take down. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and save off screen. So, next time on Let's Play Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the Game Boy, we're going to go into this area and grab some more upgrades and goodies and stuff. Woo! So, thank you guys for watching and see you guys then.